Hello and welcome back to Stop and Go F1. Now, a couple days ago I finished this, Guenther Steiner's new book called Surviving to Drive, a very unique title there for the book. I have no idea where he got the inspiration for that one from. But what this video is basically going to be is me talking about some of the biggest talking points from the book. Now, if you want just a non-spoiler type thing, I'll do that very quickly. It's really good. I really enjoyed reading this. It's in a diary type style, so he writes like not every day, but like every important day, and he'll say what time it is and where he is. And how he's doing that, I think, is actually a lot better than writing a book all at the end of the season, because there's no like retrospective thoughts of, oh, I thought this at the time, but then I thought this. It's in this exact moment, here's exactly how I feel about what's just happened. And I think that's really good, because it gives us as the audience kind of like a leverage over Guenther as the writer, because we know, oh, this is going to happen, and he has no idea. So you get to the pure idea of it. A quick example, which isn't too spoilerific, is in the Barcelona test, where he talks about Mick Schumacher going out and how he's looking forward to seeing what Nikita Mazepin can do a couple days before Nikita Mazepin gets officially fired. We as the audience know that's coming, but obviously he has no idea as he's writing it. So if you're an F1 fan, definitely pick up this book. There's lots of really interesting things. But now I'm going to go into more spoilery stuff, so if you want to leave the video, go ahead. If you want to stick around, let's stick around. So, as I was reading the book, I was making notes on my phone, and I've got them here on my screen now. So if you see me looking over there, that's what I'm doing. But let's just get into some of the notes I made. And the book actually starts in Abu Dhabi 2021, where Guenther Steiner says he needed a fucking drip of whiskey to get through the 2021 season. One thing that is immediately obvious from the book is that he writes it as he talks. There's lots of fox and there's lots of Jesus and just all this kind of stuff all the time. It's very good. It makes it feel more like him. But yeah, he talked about how difficult the 2021 season was. Something really interesting, because he speaks a lot about obviously Kevin Magnussen, because he comes back, but also Romain Grosjean. He talks about both of them, and the reason that he decided to get them out of Haas and bring in the two rookies was because Haas had decided that for 2021 there would be no car upgrades, and they wouldn't really be competitive in order to prepare themselves for 2022. And Guenther says that he feels that just really wasn't very fair to Roman and to Kevin, because they're at a stage of their careers where they want to be competitive, and that car wouldn't have let them. So Guenther felt it was better to let them go and be competitive elsewhere than to struggle for a year in the Haas. That's what he says. There's a really interesting story in here about just like the start of Haas F1, and that's one of the best bits of the book, actually, because it was a story I wasn't too familiar with, about how a US F1 team came to Guenther and asked, do you think this is viable? And he basically said no. But the idea stuck with him, and he thought that he could do it better than these other people were doing, and how he prepared a PowerPoint presentation on how it could possibly work, and he used his links with Stefano Domenicali, who was at Ferrari at the time, to try and get an engine deal in place, and he secured the engine deal. And basically, the forming of Haas came about because Guenther Steiner showed a PowerPoint to a friend of Gene Haas's in a Starbucks. And that's just how it all began. And they go on this crazy journey involving Bernie Ecclestone and Niki Lauda and presentations and really good stuff. Something else from the book, which I didn't know, is that Guenther Steiner has never watched Drive to Survive and says that he never will. The main reason being that if he was to see himself on camera and how he acts, he might not like certain aspects of his personality and then try and force changes from within himself, and that would lead to him maybe not operating as well as he could do. That's what he says. He also talks a lot about his love for Romain Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen, as I've already said. But yeah, that comes across a lot, that how much he enjoyed working with them in the seasons that they had. There is a lot of information on the dropping of Nikita Mazepin and the Uralkali sponsorship. He said it took a 5-minute board meeting to decide to drop them, But Guenther also reveals that he refused to call Dmitry Mazepin, the father of Nikita Mazepin, because every time they talk it would end in an argument, and this was a hostile enough debrief as it was, and he just couldn't be able to talk to him, so he hasn't spoken to him since before they were dropped. Now, at the time, there's also rumours about the amount of money that Uralkali were bringing into Haas, and how could Haas really survive without that amount of money, and Guenther says that that was kind of really a load of rubbish, and how, as much as Uralkali did provide a lot of money, there was never any worries that Haas were going to go out of business or not be able to compete. That was always covered, and they were fine. But let's get on to the season itself, really. There isn't really much to say about Kevin Magnussen coming back. It seems like quite a simple process. If Guenther said to Gene, do you reckon Kevin could be good? And Gene was like, do you reckon he would do it? They phone him up and he says, yeah, I'll do it. He gets out of the contract that he was in the minute and comes back. It's pretty much as simple as that. As for the rest of the season, you see Guenther's opinion on Mick Schumacher slowly change over time, and it goes up and down throughout the entire season. But the first time it goes down that I saw was in Q2 of the first race of the season. So literally Kevin is in the car doing really well, Mick's not doing too well, and that's like the first time you see kind of Guenther speak about Mick in a negative light. But see, that's one of the things I like about the book as well, is that he's like truly open and honest on here. You don't get any kind of media kind of lies, if you will. There's just true honesty all the time about how he feels about the car, even to the point where he's saying honestly that he isn't honest in interviews, and he does lie in interviews, and he does hide the truth in interviews, whereas in the book it seems to be a more, properly, this is how he feels and this is how they're going. Something that I had no idea about, and only learned about in the book, is his incredibly strange relationship with Andreas Seidel, who was the team principal of McLaren last year, and is currently the team principal of Alfa Romeo that will become Audi. They have what seems to be an awful relationship. So, on the lead up to testing, the Haas car couldn't get to Bahrain in time, and it wasn't Haas's fault, it wasn't the FIA's fault, it was just something completely out of their hands. So, Haas were given an extra hour at the end of every Bahrain testing session to make up for the time that they lost. Now, that was voted upon by the other team principals. Would Haas be allowed this additional hour? Now, all the team principals voted, yep, that's fine, they can have the extra hour, apart from one, and that was Andreas Seidel. And I don't know if something's happened before this or not, but they do not seem to get on at all. Apparently someone tells Guenther that it was Seidel that voted against them, and Guenther confronts him about this and asks him, why did you vote against us getting the extra testing time? And apparently Seidel just laughs in his face, to which Guenther says, and I quote, I then told him exactly what would happen if he ever laughed at me again, and he immediately stopped. Later on in the season, Stefano Domenicali hosts a lunch for all the team principals in Imola. And here's another quote from the book. Steiner says, I bet he's careful with the seating plan. Christian will be on the opposite end to Toto, and I will be on the opposite end to Andreas. And then he brings him up later again, when he's talking about the scene in Drive to Survive where him and Maria Binotto go to Binotto's new vineyard for the wine. He talks about the day where they filmed that. And he says that he's going to buy a case of Binotto's wine, stick a Haas logo on it, and send it to Andreas Seidel with a note that says, made from sour grapes, your favourite, Guenther. So yeah, I had no idea there was that sour relationship there. Something must have happened before this season. But yeah, really, it is kind of the midfield Toto and Christian is Guenther and Andreas Seidel. They just don't like each other. Moving back onto Mick now, the first time we hear the idea of Mick maybe not driving for Haas in 2023, that first comes up at Imola, where Guenther says that he's going to start looking for alternatives just in case. And then kind of what happens with the book is we go through the season, but at certain points in the season, something will like maybe jog a memory of a story from the past. So it's just like when he's talking about the Haas coming in, that's at the start. And there's a bit where he's talking about stories from his rallying, which are really interesting. But there's when he goes to Monaco, he starts telling stories of when they've been to Monaco before. And he tells this one unbelievably incredible story about how once in Monaco a few years ago, he was on a little moped scooter and he was driving to the circuit in the morning, and there was a little child alongside him on a push bike cycling along, and him and the child decided to have a race where Guenther got a bit carried away and went too fast and got arrested for speeding on his moped whilst racing a child. And one of the PR guys from Haas had to go to the Monaco police station and get him and bring him to the track, which is just Guenther things, you know. Only if you said, you'll never guess which team principal got arrested whilst racing a child on a moped, I go, no, I reckon it'd be Guenther, because it's not going to be any of the other ones, is it? And then after the Monaco Grand Prix, where Mick has that massive crash and Kevin had, I think it was a gearbox fault or something that made him out of the race, Guenther's entry in his diary is just that he's too pissed off to write anything. So it went down well. Someone else who gets a lot of mention in the book is one Ralf Schumacher, although he does not get named very often. Towards the start of the year, he is referred to as Ralf Schumacher, the man who is making stupid comments in German press, and later on in the book, he is only referred to as Mick's uncle, and it's never referred to again as Ralph. There is a lot, and I mean a lot, on the meatball flag situation. Now, if you remember last year, this was something that happened quite a lot to Kevin Magnussen, where if you would get damage on his front wing or something, there would be a black flag with a red circle in the middle, which means you have to go into the pits and repair your car because your car is unsafe. Now, Guenther says that in the rules, it states that the FIA must speak to the team before issuing out that flag, because they're supposed to talk to the team and say how dangerous could that potentially be. Haas never received that call from any time that Kevin received that flag, not even once. So he was incredibly annoyed at that. It also goes on later about the Alonso situation in Texas, where Alonso lost his front wing, not his front wing, it was his front mirror, sorry, and Haas protested this, and how they didn't get the meatball flag, but then they got it overturned, then it was overturned again, and he gets incredibly angry about that. Then apparently there's this big meeting at the end, and he had an angry phone call with the head of the FIA, what's his name, Mohammed, I can't remember his name, put it on the screen, him. He has a really angry phone call with him at one point. Yeah, it's one of his most angry times in the book, is those flags. Something else very interesting, one of the biggest talking points of last year, was Red Bull and the cost cap and how they went over the cost cap. Now, this only actually gets one mention in the entire book from Guenther, but the timing of it is incredibly interesting to me. Now, the official news of Red Bull's cost cap situation, I believe, came out in Texas, but the rumours of it started in Singapore. That's when Toto Wolff started talking about it, and that's when it kind of got steam before it was officially revealed. But what I find very interesting is when Guenther mentions it, because he mentions it during the summer break, which is about 2 or 3 months before even the rumours started. So he doesn't say who told him, he doesn't say anything, he just says, because there's a point where he mentions early about how Christian is saying that Haas might not be able to make the end of the season because of the cost cap. And then a few months later, during the summer break, he's going, oh, well, the reason Christian said that's been revealed is because he went over the cost cap. So Guenther knew months before even the rumours started. And he doesn't even know, he doesn't say how he knew, who told him, he just knew. Which, madness. Back to Mick's speculation now. And at Zandvoort, Guenther is 50-50 on Mick. It could go either way. It was all to do with his last few races. He really wasn't sure which way to go. But from there, he does get a lot more positive towards Mick. The most positive he talks about him in the entire book is really in like the latter third of the season. He's really praising him quite a bit. But then there is the crash in practice 1 at Japan. And I think that was the final nail in the coffin, because he says in the book that the cost of that crash on an in-lap in practice 1 in Japan was $700,000. So that's how much that cost the team, and I think that was it then. He was done. He was no coming back from that. But as I said, throughout the book, there are little stories about different other things, and there's some great stories about his time when he was working in rallying, especially stories about the Dakar Rally. That was really good. There's some great stuff about Niki Lauda in the book as well, because they both worked together at Jaguar, and they seem to become quite good friends, and there's some really personal stories about him and what kind of person he was. That was really good. So if you want to hear those stories, get the book. It's good. He speaks about Fernando Alonso at one point, and he says Fernando Alonso is the benchmark when it comes to what you need to be a complete Formula One driver. He also says that Fernando Alonso is older than God. Now, if you remember about Japan, that was the race where it was red flagged for a very long time. Then they were all forced to start on the wets, but the wets were useless, so everyone came in and changed onto the inters as soon as they could, and then went off again. Everyone came in apart from Mick, who at one point was leading the race, but just because everyone else had pitted. Guenther really beats himself up about this, saying that the Japanese performance was nowhere near as good because they were too scared to make the call to change to inters, and that he just fully takes all the blame on himself from there, and how he needs to learn from this himself. So it's not just him going, oh, Mick's not good enough here, oh, Kevin wasn't good enough here, the pits. He always, if he is to blame, he will take the blame, and he tells you on how his performances could be better and how he will become better, which I think is really quite refreshing to hear in a sports world of someone actually going, oh no, that one was on me, because you don't hear that often. Towards the end of the season as well, there's lots of discussion about MoneyGram, even though they're not fully named until like the ink is drying on the paper, then he names them. But he talks about the huge sponsors that are coming along, and apparently there's a few that they could have gone for, and they went for MoneyGram. He doesn't reveal the official number of how much they're paying, but he does state that it was nearly $100 million to be the title sponsor. And he does also say that another team, which he does not name, heard about the MoneyGram deal that Haas were going to be getting and tried to undercut Haas by offering MoneyGram the exact same offer for a third of the price, but MoneyGram wanted to stay with Haas. So I have no idea who that was or what team that was. I mean, I could guess it was Andreas Seidel because he hates him apparently. But yeah, so someone went, oh, you're paying $100 million? How about $30 million? We'll give the exact same thing. But no, MoneyGram liked the idea of the American team, so they stayed with them, and good on them because they deserve it. Then there's a lot of discussion about who's going to replace Mick, and apparently Guenther had enough he was speaking to enough drivers about the Haas second seat to fill a bus, which is very interesting. But yeah, it was Hülkenberg in the end, and apparently there was an initial talk between Guenther and Hülkenberg, and then Guenther was just going to leave him alone, and the whole thought process was, if he really wants this, he will call me, and we'll have a discussion from there. He wanted to see how much Hulk really wanted the seat, and apparently in 3 days Hülkenberg called him 10 times, which is why Guenther realised that maybe he did actually want the seat, and he got the seat. And then towards the end there's the stories of the mechanic Harvey Cook, the Haas mechanic, who unfortunately passed away from cancer in October. Some really nice stories about him. It's those kind of things that are very interesting, because obviously we know Guenther, we know Mick, we know Kevin, we know Gene Haas to a lesser extent, but we know him. The stories of someone like Harvey Cook who isn't in the limelight, those kind of stories that we won't hear, I really like that, because I don't really know much about him, but he just seems like, from the stories Guenther tells, he seems like one of the nicest, hard-working guys. There's a whole thing about how he got diagnosed with cancer, and Haas helped him out, and he kind of left his job but was still getting paid, and then after a while he was just bored and was like, can I come back? So he came back in and was still one of the hardest working members on the team, and he just seems like a really nice guy, so I'm happy that there was that tribute in there to him. It was really good. And then there's a discussion of the pole position in Brazil, and he says that the reaction he got from the crowd there, it was the only thing he can compare it to is like a home driver winning the race or winning a title, because the people were so behind Haas as these underdogs, like just cheering them on. It's great to hear that description. So there you go. That is all the biggest talking points I want to discuss from this book here. The one thing I want you to take away the most from this is that you should really read it. It's really good. I was kind of doubtful when I got it about how good it would be, but it's great. And this year I've been doing this thing where I try and read a book a month, and you know, for some books it has taken me the entire month to read it. This, I got it done in about a week. It was, you know, it was really like addictive reading. I just wanted to know what not only what happened next, because I knew what happened next, but his take on what happened next is what I wanted to see more than anything. And I hope he says in the end that he might do one for this season. I hope he is, because that kind of, it's like reading his private diary of all his thoughts on the things that I saw happen last year. Yeah, it's grand. So there you go. That's the book. Guenther Steiner, Surviving to Drive. I always have to read the title because it makes no sense. But there you go. Buy the book. Subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Goodbye.